Welcome to Lopsided Discussion. Our topic today is Great Balls of Fire. This is Liberty.
I'm ECAF Roy.
This is CHL.
And this is Entropy.
When we decided on this topic, I think it was last weekend, I basically really didn't have any idea, any inkling of what was going on. I did see a lot of movement on the forums and a lot of interest in the recent, what is seemingly uptick in near-Earth objects, specifically things like the Russian meteor. We've been seeing meteors over the East Coast and over the West Coast. It seemed like a pertinent topic for the times. When I was out doing my research, I stumbled across a person that has a pretty unique angle, it seems. His name's James McCanney. I guess he's into physics or a physicist. His basic premise is part of the electric universe theory. And specifically what I was focusing on when I was looking through his information is the comet that's coming into our solar system towards the end of the year. I think it's around October 1st. That's C2012 S1, also known as Ison. Ison is in reference to the Russian observatory that initially found it. Basically, this has me a little worried because the trajectory of the comet is going to take it past Mars, and what we don't really know yet, what we can't calculate, is how close to Mars it's going to get. If it's going to strike Mars, that's kind of the worry. And if it does, the possibility exists that it's going to knock Mars out of its orbit and also disturb the trajectory of the comet. And when this happens, it's going to be on the far side of the sun, I believe he said. It's going to be coming in to the solar system on the far side of Jupiter. So as it rounds the sun and it makes its potential contact with Mars, we won't know if its trajectory has been adjusted in such a way that it's going to come close enough to do any potential damage, or if it's actually going to hit us. So I'll be talking about that a little bit. Luke, what's your perspective on this?
I'm not sure the comet would be big enough to actually affect Mars, knocking out its orbit exactly. I mean, you do some major damage to it, I'd assume, but I mean, I don't think it's big enough to do that kind of damage, though, in my opinion.
That's a good point. I'm not really sure if we have a great idea how big this sucker's going to be. Entropy, do you have any insight or input? What do you think about the Ison comet?
I'm not really worried about the Ison comet. I don't believe that it has enough mass to knock a planet out of its orbit. I know that NASA is looking forward to 2014 when comet C2013A1 may slam into Mars, and they say it could create up to a 1 billion megaton explosion. They're not worried about that knocking, the planet out of orbit. I know there's a lot of concern expressed by people like McCanney, but McCanney's been wrong, several times. His track record's not very good. I'm a little bit afraid of how people are going to react to this comet when it appears later this year, because it's going to put on theoretically, it's going to have potential to put on a very, very bright light show. And you may see some people, wig out because all of a sudden there's this thing in the sky that's, almost quarter as bright as the sun or whatever. But it should be interesting nonetheless. I don't think it poses any danger to the Earth. I've not seen the actual trajectory of the comet itself, so I can't tell you how close it's going to come.
That's a valid point, Entropy. But that's kind of in line with what this guy is talking about. He's worried that NASA's not necessarily telling us everything that they know, / they may not know everything involved with what's going on with this comet. But that's probably what I'm going to be talking about today, and kind of justifying why I think this guy is on the right path. Luke, I know you've got a topic you want to talk about.
There's also another theory going around the community that we might be in some kind of a dust cloud, either caused by our sister sun Nemesis, our binary star, possibly, or perhaps a huge comet incoming in. It has a dust cloud either ahead of it or behind it, more or less. That's causing all these meteor strikes, say meteors in the skies, which would make sense, though.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I remember the Mayans had some part of their prediction, and I know that took an enormous dump, but some of the thought behind that was that we were passing through like a galactic plane, and as we passed through it, similar type of circumstances as Nemesis coming through, bringing in asteroids and stuff like that as we pass through that, there would be an uptick in these objects coming close to Earth, because it's basically just running through an enormous plate full of asteroids and meteorites and comets. ECAF, what do you think about the Nemesis theory?
I don't know enough to speak to it. I'm familiar with the photon belt and the galactic plane, and the idea that the reason we're seeing things in the sky happen, the cycle happened thousands of years ago, and they refer to glyphs and whatnot as evidence. So I'm kind of behind the cycles part, but the mythical creatures that are attached to that cycle, like Nibiru and Nemesis, and I don't know enough to speak to that as of yet.
Right on.
Another thing, too, I like to bring up, though, something that's causing all the planets to warm up, too. Not only Earth, though, but every single planet in our solar system is causing to warm up. This could be caused by Nemesis or something else.
And that's another point that goes along with part of the electric universe theory, that as these things enter our solar system and interact with the sun, the theory that I'm working off of is that the sun is like a huge capacitor storing energy, and that as these objects come into our solar system and interact with it, it possibly flares up and does funky things in our atmosphere. I could tell you this, I had to walk to the store the other day, my car broke down and I had to get a part, and it's been a while since I've been outside, I'll be honest with you, but like in the 2 hours I was out there, the first 20 minutes I could only open like one eye like a quarter of an inch and had to totally close the other eye because it was so brilliant outside, and just tears flowing out, and it took a solid 15-20 minutes before I could open both eyes and get a good perspective on where I was walking. And I don't remember it being that bright. I have spent time outside before I became a shut-in computer geek, so that was kind of a shock to me.
Well, isn't there a conversation right now going on about whether the sun is actually brighter, or if it's just giving off a different, frequency of light? Maybe it's, they're both pointing to some change, but I guess the frequency shift goes towards more the woo, and the other one goes towards more the lensing effect versus the sun being a dynamo from the electrical universe model.
If you talk to some people say the sun was yellow 20 years ago, now it's white. But there definitely is a change in the sun somehow.
Yeah, Luke, there's also the possibility of change in our atmosphere. I've been reading about NASA making some claims about CO2, and then I've been watching videos from this guy's Suspicious Observer, and he's making claims that the magnetic shield around the Earth is weakening. I think as a result of that, it might be reflecting less of the sun's rays, possibly contributing with what else is happening with frequencies. So the reason why I got interested in this McCanny fellow's work is because he's a big proponent of Tesla. That's one of the litmus tests that I was using while I was listening to his information. We talked about Tesla a little bit on the last show that we did, the Fukushima nuclear disaster, and in bringing it up in this conversation, the guy is also explaining the electric universe, and that kind of leads credence to his other theory regarding the icing comet. And the guy was pretty interesting. I've never heard somebody explain the Tesla tower with such clarity that I could really understand it. I followed Tesla's work for a while, but I couldn't quite wrap my head around what he was trying to do exactly. And the way this guy explained it is the ionosphere that surrounds Earth is basically energized, and it gets its energy, of course, from the sun. His perspective being that the sun is a capacitor, and that the solar winds are positively charged, and in such a model that would basically just be pushing energy past Earth, 24 hours a day. And what Tesla was trying to do with his tower is, the theory is that if you were able to punch through our atmosphere, like in a directly vertical direction, then you would be able to tap into that ionosphere and be able to utilize that energy. And part of his evidence is that when Tesla was creating this tower, that he had already sold all of his energy generating equipment to Westinghouse, that he had already sold the dynamos and the stuff like that. He was brought to the World's Fair, that material was already gone. He sold it for like $4 million, and this was 100 years ago. So there was no real reason for them to shut down his project the way that he did, unless there was possibly something going on there. And of course, something going on there being that he was trying to create an unmetered energy source that would be free for everyone. And of course, that's going to cut Westinghouse and the guys who had just bought all their coal mining gear and trying to set themselves up for the next 100 years to be rich by metering out electricity, 100 times more expensive than it should be.
So was there any direct correlation between his theory about the comet and Tesla's work, or was it just the ionosphere effect is similar, and he was using Tesla as an example of how other people were interested in the ionosphere?
Well, ECAF, it kind of tied in, more so in the electric universe perspective, and I was kind of using Tesla as, if this guy is being so forward with this information and understands it well enough that he can explain it to me and it makes sense. Part of it is NASA says that comets are basically dirty ice balls, and that the reason why they are illuminated in space is due to illumination from the sun reaching out and basically lighting up this ball of ice like a light bulb. His perspective is that the comets are actually interacting with space like a battery flying through space, or like a light bulb flying through space, and that the plasma that exists in the galaxy that's positively charged is basically like running a current through a fluorescent light bulb, and it's illuminating it in that capacity. So that's a little bit of the tie-in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's kind of like a neon bulb, kind of just negatively charged body coming into a positively charged system, and where the tail of the comet would be visually a representation of the flow of that positive charge, like rather than a a tail of the direction the body had just been, and less of a contrail and more of a plasma indicator of the magnetic, or the flow of I guess positive ions. Is that what's going on?
I think that's it, ECAF. I think it's a reaction of the plasma. Like if you were to put a wire connecting the positive to a negative on a battery, that wire would glow depending on its thickness, something along the lines of that. Another reason why I was kind of convinced that this guy might be on the right path, number one, anybody that is going against NASA, I'm probably for, because there seem to be NASA meaning not actually saying anything is kind of my little mantra when it comes to those guys. One of the other things that seemed to got skipped over and swept under the rug was the Norway spiral. And if you are buying into the electric universe model, then a near-Earth object or something like that interacting with the sun, it would basically have the possibility of like an arc, but an arc of plasma. And if you look at the videos, Norway spiral, the connector to the spiral from wherever it was reaching it. If you look at the videos, it looks like it's coming from Earth. There's some speculation that CERN was involved and was possibly causing much of that, but it was also headed towards the way of the sun that was just coming up over the mountains in the background.
What's really curious about the Norway spiral is it happened the same day they fired CERN up. And also, all the world leaders were meeting in Norway at the time, too. Coincidental, you think?
Yeah, that's definitely pretty odd, Luke. It doesn't seem like a coincidence. You know, these three major happenings going on in the same 24-hour, 48-hour period.
Well, if it was based on some natural phenomenon that produces, comets and some of this other stuff with maybe ball lightning as well, maybe it was just a mega synchronicity.
That makes sense, too. The warning of, hey, CERN, you don't necessarily have a full understanding of what you're going for, as well as challenging the authority of what the president thinks he is or can do. I could see a synchronicity in that.
Well, let's go along the weapons thing, where the mainline thing about the spiral was it was a failed missile test or something like that. Is anybody else up on the theory that the meteor in Russia was handled, or I guess the discrepancy was it was verified by a bunch of different scanning or radar locations that it was gigantic. It went from like 10 tons speculation to like 10,000 tons of meteor. So that being dispersed and blown up, whether it was the shockwave of, the atmosphere friction, all of that, I've seen some threads and quotes and whatnot of people not buying that could happen, and they think it was interfered with by some, technology or weapon that the governments or what have you don't want to talk about.
That happened at the turn of the century with the Tunguska incident. That was a even more powerful release of energy than what we saw over Russia recently. How fast was that meteor traveling when it came in?
I think it was 30,000 miles. It was either
Per hour?
30,000 miles per second, or
No, it couldn't.
no, not per second. What am I? That's like a bullet speed.
No, it
Like
wouldn't be a constant wave.
Yeah, 30,000 miles per hour or 12,000 miles per hour. I don't have the number right in front of me.
Had to be closer to 30, I think. It's going to take a hell of a weapon to hit that dead on and redo that energy. I don't think we have the technology to stop an incoming asteroid.
This is Liberty, and I'd like to suggest the Lunatic Outpost for the latest conspiracy theory news, UFO information, and fun. lunaticoutpost.com. Well, I got into a pretty good conversation with some people on Lunatic Outpost in a thread, and a lot of people were going at the angle of this is our alien brethren protecting us. That had to be a spaceship because of how fast it was going, and basically I'm referencing a dash cam video of that a Russian caught, and I'll put a link in the show thread to the video, and I took some screenshots of it, and I jumped in specifically to kind of debunk the alien thing. I'm not super big on most of the alien sighting stuff that we see on the forum, and I was trying to make a logical case for just that. For maybe obviously it wasn't earthbound because of the trajectory of what it was. It couldn't have been something like a missile because there was because of the speed of the object, and there was no contrails of any propellant being burnt. So the logical conclusion that I came up with was that it was likely a rod of some type, be it tungsten steel or whatever they're using, and that the possibility exists that it came from like a Earth orbiting satellite. Now, the conversation that I got into with somebody who claimed to be like ex-military or ex-NASA or something like that, and claimed that he put analysts on this every day, we kind of got in a little tussle, and he brought up the fact that if it was in fact a non-Earth based thing, it would have to be a satellite, but given Newton's law that as it fired the rod, it would also shoot itself out into space and dislodge its own orbit, and it would be kind of a one-shot deal. And to get something up there that had that kind of capacity, because if you look at the video, I've got two videos that were from two different angles. One is like from the Russian dash cam, where it's like coming in like across this guy's hood practically, and that's where you can get the close-up of this whatever it is appearing, and basically looks like it goes through the Russian meteor, and then when it comes out the other side, it just disappears. And then I've got another angle, which is like the meteor going from right to left, almost like right at that dash cam, and you can see like a small puff of smoke or a puff of cloud or something. And to me, that seemed like that was whatever this rod was entering our atmosphere from this non-Earth-based satellite. If you watch it in real time, it's like, and then immediately the meteor is like knocked into a billion pieces. So it kind of seemed that way to me, and that's the argument that I made. But I could understand some data there. I can't understand it being a UFO necessarily.
No, I think it's clear that there were charges planted in the meteor beforehand.
Well, I tried to get Bruce Willis for an interview, but he wasn't available.
A lot of these times, too, these meteors just explode in the sky due to the pressure and the heat, too, though. So, I mean, it might be a normal occurrence, too.
Yeah,
well, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going
to go ahead.
I've seen small meteors do that. Small shooting stars blow up, but you know, if a little one can do it, you know, a bigger one can do it too. I would have to look at this evidence to see if there's anything convincing in it before.
Well, entropy.
I'd be willing to change the conclusion on that.
That was this gentleman's perspective, that it was likely pressure and heat fermenting the atmosphere, but like ECAF was saying, this thing was anywhere from 1,000 tons to 10,000 tons, and that's not necessarily the size of things we normally see burn up in the atmosphere. I thought they said it was like the size of a school bus, and to me it seems like it would take a hell of a lot more than pressure and heat to make it explode. But I was just trying to argue a theory with this guy, and he was pretty sure I was wrong, and he said he had been doing this for 40 years, but it is the internet, and we are on lunatic outposts, so there's no telling.
Let me ask you this, though. Do you think Russia has the technology to shoot one down currently?
Well, Luke, that's part of my point to him, was that I kind of felt like Russia and America and maybe some of the other superpowers had a joint interest in setting up a system to protect the Earth, because if something came through that was going to devastate, be an extinction leveled event, we've all got an interest in preventing that.
Also, if you believe David Wilcock's material, he points to somebody else that claims the Russians have a 30-year head start on torsion field science, because when they were divvying stuff up in Project Paperclip, all the Western or American scientists poo-pooed a lot of what the German scientists were working on as, hocus pocus, and didn't fit into their model. So the Russians got all these, unwanted baseball card, of Nazi scientists. And that put them, because of the, closed-mindedness of American scientific research back then, they had a 30-year head start on torsion field science, which goes back into Tesla, and basically it would be like they've got a 20-year head start on HARP. So you could go deep woo with that, in assuming that they've got that going on. They've got a little network, and maybe the having to stop that meteor was showing their hand in a missile shield, missile defense system that only the highest of the high level people even knew existed. Dun dun dun. Woo.
I think that the project, I've seen reference to, somebody Shaky brought this up in the thread when I was asking for some help today. He mentioned the possibility of weaponizing various asteroids, meteorites, and comets, and that system, that project was called Thunderbolt. And I think that's in line with the rod being shot from an orbiting satellite. I just got the information before the show, so I wasn't able to get too deep into the explanation, but it kind of jives with what I was thinking.
Is that like altering the course of a naturally, moving body in order to have it fall on Earth somewhere specific and claim ignorance because it was a natural event?
Yeah, ECAF, that's basically using it as cover, and instead of using like a nuclear device or something that they would shoot in themselves, exactly using some type of projectile to alter the course of the meteor and have it land where they want it to land. And the gentleman that I was speaking to in the thread said, well, when you get to that point, where did the meteor land? What was there a zone that the meteor hit that is of some type of importance? Where did the meteor hit? There was some reports of it landing in a frozen lake, but the divers debunked that when they were unable to find any pieces of the meteor in the lake. And if it's the size of a bus, and if you look at the videos, it's shattering windows. It's setting off car alarms. It's practically knocking people off of their balcony with a shock wave. Then it stands to reason that there would be some remnants left around.
Well, if that is true, then that brings us to this show's Pop Culture Point Out, which is a segment that I just made up but seems to be reoccurring, because that's the plot of the movie Starship Troopers.
Really?
Dun dun dun.
Well,
Dun, dun, dun.
I remember a shower scene.
Yeah. Again, the boobs distracted you. The bugs that they were fighting, the humans were fighting, the war was escalated by the bugs altering some asteroids in our asteroid belt or their asteroid belt or something, and it they calculated it because they had a super brain bug, and it sent a bunch of asteroids and took out Buenos Aires, and it was basically the same thing that the government's thinking. So the government is no better than a bunch of mutant bugs.
That's interesting because that's Robert Heinlein, and I'm a pretty big fan of his. And actually, Starship Troopers, if I'm not mistaken, it was banned in the United States when it came out, and this was like late 50s, I think, early 60s. So that's interesting that they would want to hide that and sweep that information under the rug.
Act of God, wasn't us. That's a classic.
Yeah, keeping in line with HARP and weather modification theories and woo. So I don't know if you guys have any personal experiences observing things like this in the night sky. I know that I've seen 2 in the last 2 years. I'm sure it helps that I'm always work second and third shift, so I'm always up at night. And beyond that, I'm a smoker, and so I'm always outside smoking at work and stuff. And I tend to stare up at the sky pretty regularly. The 2 that I saw, I was the first one. I was coming home from this gathering. It's called the Manifestation Celebration, and it's basically Alex Gray, who is an artist that was friends with Terrence McKenna and is a pretty popular in like the hallucinogens circles and the shamanic circles. So I was interested to go and check that out. Of course, I was stone sober except for a beer or two, and I was headed back from Dallas to my little suburb that I live in just outside of Dallas. And on the way home, I was on the highway, and up out of the corner of my eye, I caught a fireball, and I think it was pretty much just like an orange-red shape, but it crossed probably 30 or 40 degrees of my field of vision. And I was sitting there thinking there are probably a group of hundreds of people that are sitting outside after this celebration let out. They were all kind of laying around in the park. I'm pretty sure they were all high on something. And I couldn't imagine just sitting there looking up at the sky and seeing this enormous fireball pop out of the sky from nowhere. I'm sure it blew all their minds. It blew mine, and I was, like I said, pretty much stone sober. And it appeared to be going from south to north because I was headed west, and it crossed me from left to right. The second one I saw, I was walking home from Tom Thumb, just going on I used to go on nightly walks and stuff, and this was like 1 or 2 in the morning. Oh shit, I just remembered I saw a third one. I lied. I'll have to get into that one. I actually made a thread about that one on the Lunatic Outpost. The second one that I saw, I was coming home, and I think I had just lit a cigarette, and I was like blowing out, exhaling, and looking up, and it was just, you could see like the ash cloud of smoke behind it that was just barely lit by it, and it seemed to be like a much brighter hue, like a yellow orange rather than like an orange red, but like the other one I saw. It seemed to be headed from south to north, but kind of more of like a northwest to or a southwest to a northeast kind of direction. And that blew my mind. And then I just remembered the third one that I saw, and that was in January of this year. It was on the 23rd. I looked it up on the asteroid reporting, the fireball reporting website. There were several other sightings like that, and it was funny. I was helping my mom clean up her house, and I was taking out some trash, and she said, "Oh, you can see Jupiter in the sky when you get outside. Look up, kind of towards DFW Airport, which is kind of to the east of us." And sure enough, I dropped the bag of trash off, and I was walking back to the house, which is in that direction. She told me to look, and I looked up, and I saw, like, from south to north, I saw another fireball pop out of the sky, and I started running backwards, trying to keep my eye on it, because it started going down behind the back of the house over the roof, and I just about ran into traffic backwards. So I'm glad I kind of stumbled in the ditch before that happened. I was in awe. But yeah, so that's like 3 that I've seen in the last 2 years, and the last one being just a couple of months ago. Have you guys ever seen a fireball, meteor, comet, or anything like that?
I seen one when I was a kid, about 12 years old. I woke up in the middle of the night for no reason, looked out my window. There was this huge fireball in the sky. It lasted for about 10 minutes. It was just totally awesome.
Damn.
I've probably seen 2 in the last 10 years. One of which I was at work, and actually there was a full moon out when this one happened. It did happen it did blow up. I had access to some binoculars and looked at it, and you could actually see a contrail, and you could see a corkscrew where it disintegrated. It's pretty neat.
And entropy, this was like, I guess, the eastern side of the United States, to be as non-specific as possible.
Yes, it was the eastern side of the United States. I believe it was traveling south.
Gotcha. And of course, I mentioned mine were in Dallas. And you're also kind of northeastern also, aren't you, Luke?
Yeah, I'm near the Chicago area. That's correct.
Gotcha. ECAF, have you had any viewings?
Nothing more than the standard, kind of chunky shooting star that, sparklers off, but nothing with any good color or, left, a trail or anything like that.
Interesting. Well, while we're talking about sightings, the same day you mentioned while we were preparing the show notes, ECAF, that in Cuba, the same day that they had the Russian meteor, the Russian fireball come in, that the Cuban residents had a similar incident, and we looked that up, and sure enough, they didn't have near the same type of destruction that occurred, but within a few hours, they had seen their own, and there were also reports of this happening in California, residents seeing a fireball over California. And if you think about how the Earth spins at a pretty quick whip, you know, that it sounds like that stuff might be probably related. I mean, it's hard to think that would be coincidental, you know. I would think that these things are related.
Did anybody actually see it?
I didn't see it. I didn't see it firsthand. I've seen some videos that were posted of it. Fortunately, they had enough security cameras going that they've got a pretty good whip of it, and I'll try and throw a link to that in the show thread for people to view.
Did it have any color to it?
They said it had a green hue. The video that I saw was a black and white security cam, and there's only been a handful of videos to come out, which is kind of ridiculous. And I guess we've already gone through who's seen what, so none of us actually saw that.
I'm just wondering if anybody's looked for a similarity, if there was any color to the burn off of any of the video that have caught of these meteors, if they're all consistent, or if they all have, if they flare different colors or something. I mean, that would give an idea if you're dealing with a field, or give credence to the idea that we're going into a tail or a dust cloud or something, where you'd have a lot of different materials, or if it's the same, maybe it's just parts of that used to be the same body and now are just traveling in a general tight area, and we just caught a few of them.
That makes sense. I was surprised to hear that some people had seen some with a green hue, because I've never, like I said, all the ones I've always seen have always been either a yellow to a red color, which would kind of indicate, would be in keeping with your theory that these are possibly part of the same thing that have broken up and are just now coming into our atmosphere.
This is CHL, Ku and Luke, and you're listening to LOPsided Discussion on Biased Propaganda.
Well, if we are indeed dealing with, an escalation of events because we're now in a highly populated area of, these potential meteorites or meteors, it would just be interesting to, kind of gauge, assuming that that's true, what we're dealing with as far as like, an array of stuff. Or a concentration of one thing, whether I guess it would really, if you got down to minutia, it would either back up, some of the Nibiru or the, galactic plane or kind of thing. Could you be used to bolster either argument?
I guess the two perspectives that we're looking at here are, these are possibly comets or if meteor asteroids that are kind of in an orbit, that cyclically come back around in much the same way that it's been proposed that Nemesis has, that it's in an orbit with Earth, as opposed to the galactic plane theory, which is we are on an elliptic that goes up through this plane that exists all the time, and it's not necessarily an orbit around our sun or anything like that. It's a plate that we pass through every 3,600 years or 12,000 years. I forget the exact length of the cycle.
I believe that they looked into that a few years ago, and it was determined that there's no evidence that mass extinction events associated with the asteroid or comet impacts happen with any regularity. At one time, it was believed that there was a cycle that had happened every so many thousand years, but they've recently discovered that like 2 or 3 of the mass extinction events were relatively close together, and then there was another one that was even farther apart and so forth. I'm not saying there's not a brown dwarf out there circling that throws stuff to us every now and then, but the evidence doesn't seem to support that.
Well, I do remember watching a NASA video where somebody actually, like, I'll try and find a link to it and put it in the thread, entropy. They actually had NASA spokespeople who were put on the spot and said, so are there no brown dwarfs? Are there no planets? Are there no things that are in elliptical orbit that you know about? And it was a female scientist, and she said, yeah, there's a brown dwarf out there. And this was fairly recently, which kind of goes against the party line that NASA and the lead scientists and astronomers have been toting. And of course, there was an article in the 80s about pretty much about Planet X. I think it was in American Scientist or a fairly reputable published magazine, and it's impossible to find that article practically anymore. I've seen like maybe one researcher. I think this guy's handle is Lucas. He's got a really drawn out presentation, and it doesn't end good. So I got involved in that for a while, and the totality of it, it was so heavy I was nailed to my couch for about 3 days going, oh my God, we're all going to die. But this was, as you guys know, I'm pretty fresh to the conspiracy theory world. Just getting started with the Zachariah Sitchin, and then coming to terms with the fact that all might be a crock of shit.
Well, it was just earlier this month they did discover a brown dwarf, but it's about, I can't remember, 6 to 8 light years away, fairly close in space standards. It's part of a binary system. Theoretically, we could have a brown dwarf, and they are looking for that. That's one of the reasons they built a satellite that found that brown dwarf. Whether or not they're hiding something, not telling us about it, I don't know.
Well, it seems like I remember reading an article that they're finding that not only are most systems binary, most solar systems having two alternating, stars, but also that each solar system, there's a possibility that it has its own black hole. That I cannot confirm or deny, but the part about most systems being binary systems, that would go, it would literally go right along with the Earth was flat, and then we figured out that it wasn't, but then we thought everything revolved around the Earth, and then that didn't happen. And now we've got this theory that it's a single star system that we're in, and possibly to be refuted and replaced with there is actually a binary system that we're in, which would lend credence to the nemesis theory.
The comet that is supposed to hit Mars next year is traveling almost 55 kilometers per second. And it has a nucleus that could be as small as 15 or as large as 50 kilometers wide. So they're saying that if that hits Mars, it could be 100 times more powerful than wiped out the dinosaurs.
So then we're going to find out if comets are dirty snowballs or if they're a solid, metal that happens to have a strong, opposite charge than our solar system. That'll be a day of vindication.
Well, it's also interesting that they've made that they're scuttling so hard to get like Mars rovers out there. Out of all the planets, what they're focusing on is getting something on Mars. It's almost like they think something might happen to Mars, and they want a set of eyes on the planet when it happens. My theory about that is, I probably mentioned it toward the beginning of the show, but it'd be more pertinent now. The idea is if the comet misses Mars, that the possibility exists that it could get an atmosphere back from the tail of the comet if it passes close enough, rather than swiping off the atmosphere.
I'm not sure if there's enough energy in the tail of that comet to do anything as far as create an atmosphere. You're talking about a planet that has almost no atmosphere because it has very little gravity. even if it were to have an effect, I don't think Mars could hold on to it. Mars is also the closest planet to the Earth that we can actually send stuff to. You can't send probes to Venus like the Mars rover because they won't survive the acidic and high pressure atmosphere. You'd get a few minutes of data and then that would be it. Jupiter's the next closest planet besides Mercury, and Jupiter's a gas giant. There's a moon on Jupiter that's very interesting. There's actually a few moons on Jupiter that we probably should be looking at, but it would be very expensive to do so. I believe they're planning to do that in the future, but we just don't have the means to do that right now.
That would be, I think that's Europa.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I think it's Europa, Jupiter. I can't. I'm bad with names.
Titan too, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also a moon on Saturn that they're looking at. That's one of them.
Good point. Which planet the Europa is on or circulating, I remember one of the astronauts, it might have been Buzz Aldrin. I'll have to look up the video and see if I can find it. And he made a case on public television and during a news interview that there is a monolith on Europa, and that we don't know how it got there. We don't know what it does, and that's kind of part of the basis of the 2001 monolith. Like, that might have been where Arthur C. Clarke got the idea for it.
I remember reading something about that. There's actually a picture somewhere of that. I'm not sure that it's artificial, but there is an interesting rock formation on one of those planets. One of those moons.
It's interesting stuff, whether it be natural or left over from an ancient civilization. The fact that it still exists and we have the technology to hopefully someday get there and check it out keeps me excited and interested in space travel for sure.
Let's go back to the comet potentially hitting Mars. Maybe Mars is stalled out as a planet. Maybe it's not dead. Maybe its systems, have just come to a grinding halt. Mm-hmm. And a comet hitting it with all that extra energy as far as whatever makes it glow in the tail and everything, and the actual impact. Maybe it's like spraying a little ether in the carburetor and, getting the engine to turn over again. It's like the opposite of nuclear winter, or a good nuclear winter, or nuclear spring. I don't know.
Given the size that the comet is projected to be, several kilometers, there's no telling what its gravity is, and adding that, if the possibility exists that if it struck Mars, adding to its mass, that could also increase its gravity, and in that case, whatever is in the tail, if there is some ice, if there is some water, if there is various things that add to an atmosphere, then it would certainly make a good case that it's a rejuvenation, like a genesis for that planet.
So most likely NASA knows about this. The rovers are equipped with little inflatable rafts, and as soon as the oceans form in the first island, the rovers are really there to roll up and plant the flag.
Yeah. Claim it. That would make sense to me. I mean, why else?
I'm not sure if the Martians would like that.
Well, they got to survive a comet impact, so.
They live underground anyway.
I know, but it would be really loud.
Ooh, that kind of brings up the hollow planet theory.
No.
That, I'm not sure if this is relevant or if we can tie this in, but a lot of the people that bang the drum of electronic universe also kind of buy into the hollow world. And we discussed this just a little bit yesterday when we were doing show prep, ECAF. A lot of the theory and history and stuff that it's possible that maybe an ancient civilization. I may be taking this a little more into Wu land, but an ancient civilization created like a Dyson sphere situation and could be living, for instance, on the inside of Earth. I put a lot of thought into this last night, well, relatively for me. And the idea is, from what I've read, that in the inside, if this inner Earth were to exist, that it would be primarily like crystalline. And to lend some authenticity to that, they've found like a crystalline cave. I think it was in Mexico, and they've got pictures of this guy, and there's like enormous like quartz crystal outcroppings like the size of trees. They literally look like trees. So thinking about that, you've got a civilization. It's like historically it's been known as Agartha. I think that's what you were referring to last night, ECAF. There's also references to it being Shambhala in Indian in the Vedas. It would be, instead of trees and dirt and stuff like that, they would have, crystalline structures that would be very similar to the trees. So if you imagine growing up in a reality where it's not dirt and flowers and the common flora and the things that we see on the outside of the planet, that it would be crystals and fluorescent fauna, and with like a plasma sun in the middle that's always there. If you came on the outside of the planet, it would seem like a big dirty pond or a big dirty mess of like something you would find under a bed, in a room that hadn't been cleaned for 10 years. So in that instance, it kind of makes me think that they had this Dyson sphere. They weren't necessarily paying attention to the outside of it. Somehow it accrued an atmosphere possibly created to take out incoming asteroids, fireballs, comets, and then because of that atmosphere existing, human race and all of our various plant and animal life were given a chance to bloom. And then 100,000 years, 10,000 years, or whatever amount of time has passed, we've evolved enough that now we're tinkering with nuclear energy, setting off bombs, and this is having a negative impact on the interplanet society, and that's why we're seeing various things that look like aliens, that it's actually just a much more advanced civilization. And that would also lend credence to the argument that, quote, aliens, end quote, might have intercepted this large Russian meteor to kind of take some of the kinetic energy out of it so it wouldn't ring the earth like a bell for 100 years and shatter all of their wonderful quartz crystal trees. What do you guys think about that?
That's some woo. But would a Hollow Earth society even really be concerned about the topic of meteors and comets, or would they just be like, meh, it's a little earthquake, no big deal?
That's a good question. I think it would depend on their technology. If it's no more than opening a garage door, pulling out, and hitting a horn to counteract the effect of a potentially serious kinetic or not serious impact to the Earth, then, why not? And of course, this all goes back to the Admiral Byrd diary and its authenticity, which has been argued pretty good. I like the Woo. I stand pretty strongly in that camp, and I can't necessarily say I believe that the Admiral Byrd diary is authentic, because really I think it just popped up in the 80s, and the guy that brought it to everyone's attention kind of turned it into a religion, sold a bunch of books off of it, and that was leading into like the New Age, when the whole occult information started coming out and getting perverted and sold, pretty much, in my opinion. Are you guys familiar with the Admiral Byrd diary?
Yeah,
a little bit.
All familiar with it. Yeah, it's classic classic conspiracy theory, like 101. If you know about the Hollow Earth theory, usually Admiral Byrd's story is like either how you hear about it or one of the main things referenced. And his son had something to do with the story later on, as far as vouching for the diaries and kind of breathing life into it again, either in the late 90s or early thousands.
Well, it's kind of along the same lines as the Europa monolith. Not really sure if it's real, but it's compelling information, and it always leads into a great debate, depending on your perspective.
We appreciate your 5-star rating, and remember to join us next time on another lopsided discussion here on Biased Propaganda Radio.